Today we're gathered to offer, first and foremost, we're here to offer to God what he deserves, aren't we? He deserves the deepest affections of our hearts. That's the primary reason that we're here. But at the same time, we're acknowledging this morning our painful grief and disappointment. That's the reality, isn't it? Who's disappointed? I'll be the first one to say I'm disappointed. Yeah. And it's in that acknowledgement of our grief that our hearts can become, frantic. It's in that space where we can become restless and unable to settle. Now, the world obviously has its remedies for that condition, doesn't it? Maybe a stiff drink or two or several. Or, distraction. It's a good remedy as well, isn't it, that many people turn to. Throw yourself into work, throw yourself into hobbies, sports. The World Cup's on now, isn't it? We can even distract ourselves with good things like helping others, can't we? Anything, though, but facing the pain of the situation. Truth be told, all of those things, though, they don't benefit us in the long run, do they? And this psalm, what I love about this psalm, I've read it, I've lost count of how many times I've read it in my life. I'm sure you're the same. But in this psalm, we get a divine alternative. This psalm calls us to something far better than just coping mechanisms and distractions. It invites us to gain perspective. And to gain that perspective, we have to look closely at the character of the one who is inviting us into his presence. Let's look at who this God truly is when our world's shaking. What does the psalm say? It says that he's a fortress in times of trouble. Do you believe that? The Lord Almighty, verse 11. That Hebrew word there, Yahweh Sabaoth. It literally means Lord of armies. And it portrays God as this supreme commander of the heavenly forces. It appears over 260 times in the Old Testament, and it often appears in context of warfare and national crisis. But it goes further than that. What I love is that it goes further than that. The psalm is personal. Notice the personal touch. It says that the commander, this mighty commander of heaven's armies, is with us. He's with us. He's intimately present with his people. He's not like the distant general. He's like the closest ally. He's the man in the trenches beside you. He's also the faithful God of Jacob. What does he mean by that? Who's Jacob? What he means is that he's a God who is faithful throughout the generations. He's not like me and you, where we muster a bit of faithfulness for a few days or a few months or a few years or a few decades. He's the God who is faithful from generation to generation. He's not detached from our trouble and our pain. He's right alongside us. He's faithful to people even as flawed as Jacob, as me and you. He's also our fortress and our strength. That word misgav, it means a high, inaccessible place. Now, I want this reality to assure your hearts this morning, as we read this psalm, that with the Almighty as your protector, the psalm says that he elevates us, he lifts us high above our enemies. He secures us like an impenetrable stronghold. The Lord lifts us above our troubles. It doesn't mean that we deny our troubles, but what it means is that this mightiest ally is with us in the midst of it. Given the difficulty of Paula's passing this week, we need to know that we don't face this emotional battle alone. Many of us try to face emotional battles alone, don't we? I've done that in my own life, and let me tell you, it always goes south pretty quickly. The Lord of heaven's armies, he fights for us. It doesn't mean that we won't face struggles again and again in our lives, but we face them with the mightiest ally possible. You know, there's a beautiful lady who used to say, let's not focus on what is it? On what's wrong, but what's strong. I love that. That's Paula's saying, by the way, if you're wondering who said that. Let's focus on not on what's wrong, but what's strong. Well, if we're going to heed the wise words of that wise lady, then we need to look at the God who is altogether strong, don't we? God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. And it's because he's our fortress that we can accept a truth that cuts right through the desire to, like Sam's alluded to this morning, it cuts right through the desire to sort of manage our own grief. And that's this truth, that God is sovereign and we're not. I'm here to burst your bubble yet again this morning. God is sovereign and we're not. See, this is our human desire. We want to see things through God's perspective. We want to see through God's eyes. We simply don't have that privilege, though. See, we see through the eyes of faith, and God sees through the eyes of sovereignty. And that's a privilege not granted to you and me. What are the eyes of faith? The eyes of faith are a spiritual perception. The eyes of faith are the desire to trust God's purposes and his plans and his promises. The eyes of faith are the ability to recognize his presence in the midst of difficult circumstances. The eyes of faith are the capacity to see beyond what the natural worldly disorder and difficulty is saying to us, and steadfastly trust God's purposes even when we don't know, or even when we don't understand, rather, his methods. That's what the eyes of faith are for. But the eyes of sovereignty, well, they're exclusive rights that belong only to God. God's sovereignty means that he sees the grand plan. Me and Debs were just talking about it this morning. God sees the grand plan. And you and I don't. I mean, he does let us in on the end, doesn't he? We know what's to come. But before we get there, before we get to new heavens, new earth, before we get to tears wiped away, before we get to a cessation of all pain and suffering, we don't see how it all stitches together now, do we? That's a right and that's a privilege that belongs to God alone. What does Deuteronomy 29:29 say? The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us. Revelation is ours. What God has revealed belongs to us and our children forever, that we may follow the words of this law. The secret things belong to the Lord. Do you stress over the secret things? I have, yeah. And I still do, if I'm honest, from time to time. I've heard people this week, just in processing their grief, talk about how they stress over the secret things. The secret things, they do belong to the Lord. This is our joy and duty. Our joy is to obey the Lord's will as he has revealed it to us, and to trust him in the things that are not yet disclosed to us. God knows all about our pains. He knows all about our struggles. And he says, trust me. Trust me. I know the beginning from the end. I know the beginning from the end. And I can assure you it's all going to turn out for your good. It's all going to turn out for your good. So, how do we practically live this out then today? You know, right here in the midst of our grief for Paula, right here in the midst of our disappointment, well, the psalmist gives us two direct calls to action that can lift us in this weariness that we sense. The first one is very simple. He says, be still. Be still. My mum and dad used to say about me, he doesn't know how to be still. Maybe you've got kids like that. But let me I do say that about you, Jimmy. You're right, yeah. Stop shouting out. Be still. But this stillness isn't just about not fidgeting. It's not just an appeal to say, go to bed and pull the duvet over your head. This is a stillness that means something more than that. Have you ever noticed how hard we find it as human beings to surrender control of our lives and our circumstances? You find that difficult? When we face hardship, remaining still and giving control to God, it feels counterintuitive. It feels like the last thing that you want to do, doesn't it? It goes against our gut instinct. But if we truly believe what we've just heard, that God is sovereign, then come on, let's logic it out for a moment. What does the logic of sovereignty say? Because God is sovereign and we're not, surrendering control actually begins to make sense, does it not? Let me ask you this. Who would you rather be in charge? An all-knowing, all-powerful, or ever-present God who is altogether good in everything he does and everything he doesn't do, might I add, and who cares more than you and or I could ever imagine? Would you rather him be in charge or you? And I'm not here to be nasty to anyone this morning, but you're not that great. All right? I'll admit this morning, there's been numerous times in my own life where I haven't trusted the Lord, where frantically I have had my fingerprints upon everything. And I can testify to you this morning that it never works out well. I mean, inwardly. Because situations are very much out of our control the majority of the time. But our response to, what God is doing in the midst of our situations and circumstances, it always has a bearing on what's going on in our hearts. We can very quickly surrender peace. And I'm here to tell you this morning, I've surrendered peace more times than I care to admit. That's not the Lord's will for us. Inner turmoil is not the Lord's will for us. There's times when I've frantically tried to understand things that are what the psalmist calls things too wonderful for me. Psalm 131, I love that psalm. I don't concern myself with things too wonderful for me. Look at what Isaiah 55, 8 and 9 says. For my thoughts are not your thoughts. You've heard these words time and again. You've heard them this week already. Neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. This is the lesson that I've learned and that I'm still learning, that peace comes when our strivings cease. That's how you gain peace. When striving cease. This is what the Hebrew word be still is in this psalm, rafah. And it literally means to slacken. It means to relax. It means to let go. It means, loosen your grip. God is teaching us to surrender control. Are you willing to loosen that tight grip that you're so prone to have upon your circumstances? It means ceasing our relentless effort to understand and instead trusting him with the outcomes over which only he rules. So we're called firstly to be still. Secondly, every time we go through a period of difficulty, hardship, of suffering, pain, it's always an opportunity to know God more deeply. That's the second thing. God invites us to know him more deeply. Whenever we're struggling to make sense of our circumstances, he invites us to know him at a far deeper level than just the intellect. I know many things about God. I've got a head full of theology and doctrine and all sorts of things that I've learned. But the question is, do you know him personally? Anyone can know things about God, but do you know God? That's what this psalm invites us to this morning. It's inviting us to draw near to God personally, to move beyond just mere intellect. Have you really opened yourself to his loving care, to his comforting presence? Are we satisfied to know him just the way that people know people, that they read about on Wikipedia? Or do you want to know God personally? Let me tell you, it's in the place of suffering where you get to know Christ best. See, this is the reward of surrender. When you loosen up, when you slacken your grip, you surrender yourself to him, you begin to truly know the one that you're surrendering to, and you start to know why. You're there with the person who you've given your life to, and you begin to intimately know him. This is what Paul says in Philippians 3, verse 10. This is not a long sermon this morning. We're going to finish in just a moment. Philippians 3, verse 10. Paul says, I want to know Christ. I want to know him. I don't just want to read about him. I don't want to just have second-hand experience from somebody else who seems to know him. He says, I want to know Christ. Yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death. That's Paul's cry that we still hear today, and it's our cry as well. It should be our cry. It's, I want to know you, Lord. I'm not satisfied to know you at a mere intellectual level. I'm not satisfied to just know about you. I want to know you through sharing your experience of suffering. I don't want to know you, Lord, the easy way. I want to know you the hard way. And I know this is a big thing to say. But I know that she would say this herself because I've sat down with her enough times over these last few years and just heard her heart. That's what Paula would say. She would say that she's gotten to know Christ not through living just on a mountaintop, but she's got to know Christ because she's been in the deepest of valleys. She's got to know Psalm 23 that promises that even though she walked through the darkest valley, God was with her. And I had the privilege of being with Paula just in that last 24 hours, which one of two of you did. And I tell you, she died full of faith. Full of faith. And I mean it when I say I want to die like her. She knew Christ through suffering because Christ had suffered for her before she ever came to be. He came and lived our life. This is how much God cares about us. You say, how can you prove to me that God cares about me, Nathan? And again, there's lots of intellectual arguments that you could muster up, and I could go back to my Bible college days and all of the rest. What I know is this. I know in my heart of hearts, God cares about Paula. He cares about me, and he cares about you because he wasn't willing to stay detached from our suffering. God became flesh in the person of Christ. And he wasn't a man who lived full of privilege. He wasn't like a king in a palace. The power that he had, he never used for his own benefit. He used it always for the benefit of others. If anyone was entitled of any sort of privilege, it was Jesus Christ, the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings. And yet he surrendered his rights to be able to enter into our suffering, to take upon himself every hardship and pain that you or I would ever experience. That's why I love the Lord, because he's walked in my shoes. And so I want to walk in his shoes. And Paul has walked in the Lord's shoes. He's taken her now to himself. It's our destination of all those who are willing to walk the path of suffering. And so, Father, I pray this morning that your comfort would come and console us. Lord, there are days of grief ahead. That weight of bereavement, Lord, comes heavily because we've loved this woman. Would you pour into us, Lord, your refreshing presence? Help us to, Lord, walk faithfully before you the way that our sister has all these years. In Jesus' name, amen.